Hello, my photo class. What is up? So I am recording this tutorial so that you can learn more deeply about the different adjustments that Photoshop has to offer. And this way you can refer back to this video and go along at your own pace as we edit our street photography photos this week. So, here is an image that I took in 2012. Super pretty. This is what Virginia looks like. And so the first thing I want to mention is that when we look at this image, we can see that there is a nice red tone throughout the image because of the time of day that it was taken at. So this caused this image to be a very warm photo. And we'll talk later on about this with color balance, but there's warm photos and cool photos. So I just want you to keep that idea in your mind as we go along. So your Photoshop screen may look a little different than mine because I'm using an older version, but if you look on the left side of your screen, you will see the toolbar. The main ones that we are going to focus on is this little arrow. I would call that the move tool or the arrow. The marquee tool, which essentially if you drag and select, you can crop this area or do different adjustments using just that selection. Below is the lasso tool, and we actually will only be using the magnetic lasso tool if we choose to use one, but essentially this helps you go along an object to try and select it. So as you can see, as I move along, it's placing little dots along the subject's body so that because it can identify the lines, and every once in a while you'll have to click down, I'm doing that right now, rather than just dragging your mouse around. So now this has created a selection with the subject selected. Cool. Below that is the quick selection tool, which is the tool I would suggest you use when you are making selections. Similarly to the magnetic lasso, this also finds the edges of whatever you're trying to select to make it easier for you. And if you look at the top the top left of your Photoshop, where my mouse is currently circling, you'll see three different brushes. One has a minus, one has a plus, and one is just solo. So the difference between the plus and the minus brush at the top here is that the minus would subtract your selection. So let's say I'm going to select my subject once more. There you go. I can now go in and fine-tune the areas that I want selected by using the subtraction tool. And if you hover your mouse over this tool, you'll see that it says subtract from selection. This tool below is called the crop tool, and this allows you to move in the borders of your image to crop your image. So now my image is just this, but I don't actually want to do this. Those are for the time being the main ones that we will focus on. Now, that on the left side is called your toolbar. Your the Windows bar, which would be the top area where it says Photoshop, File, Edit, Image, and where you would see all these drop downs, is called the Windows bar, as I mentioned. And over in this area, we have our adjustments. This is on the right side of your screen. We have our adjustments and our layers window. Now the layers window will become very important, and we may have already mentioned this, but every time you make a new adjustment, it will create a new layer, and you can turn these layers on and off, which will help you while editing. So, to start with our adjustments, I am going to open up the brightness contrast. And what this does is exactly what it says. It can adjust the brightness, so it can make the overall image lighter, and it can also adjust the contrast. So when something has little to no contrast, there are almost no shadows in it. You can see this around the legs, where there is no longer shadows, and on this stone wall, as well as in the hair. But when we have the contrast as high as possible, there are deep shadows that you can see, especially along the stone wall. And if our brightness wasn't turned up all the way, this would be the image at full contrast. So there is a term that people use for images with almost no contrast, and that would be that it's dull. So this is an example of a possibly dull image. So I'm going to click on my eyeball under my Layers tool where my mouse is circling and turn this off and on. I'm going to keep it off as we move forward. The next adjustment is our Levels tool. This is the main tool that you will be using. When you first open up your image, you will want to adjust the levels. This adjusts the exposure and the contrast. So when we look at the Levels tool, we can see what's called a histogram. And this is, and hopefully you can see where my mouse is, but it's on the right side. This is a visual image of the information in your photograph. So when I look at this histogram, I can tell that the image is very bright in some areas because the information touches the ceiling of the histogram. And if I look on the left side of the histogram where the shadows is represented, I can tell that there are shadows, but there's not too many. So a good way to work with levels is to just do it by eye, and you're going to pull your dark pointer inwards, and you're also going to pull your highlight pointer inwards. Now, we have spoken about the area that you would pull these up to, and you generally, as a rule, would want to pull it to where the information is at the highest. So as you can see, there's not that much information in this plateau, and as I pull it in, this is where it starts to really shine. But this makes my image really bright, and let's just say I don't want it that bright and I want to see those mountains in the back. This would be fine too. Anything that you do in Photoshop is your choice, and as long as you can back it up, there's no one telling you otherwise. So I'm going to turn that layer off, even though our levels layer is very important. And I'm going to talk about a few of these other adjustments that I would love for you to experiment with, but we are actually not going to utilize them that much. The next one would be curves, and this displays the same exposure and contrast as Levels does in a histogram, but it has a line graph. So if you're really into graphs, this is a really great thing for you to use. I often use it, and some fun things that you can do with this is the way that it works is you would make 3 points on your line graph, and you can drag the dots or the points up to change different exposures. This is what's called an S-curve, and this would be adjusting the highlights to be brighter and the shadows to be darker. Anything that is on this top part of the line is your highlights, and anything that is on this bottom part is your shadows. But if you want to be very experimental, you can do the opposite, and as you can see in the image, some really weird colors and contrast information starts showing up. So you can make really cool images like this, and I'm totally fine with that, but let's chat about why you're doing that. Definitely play around with curves, but it's not the most intuitive or easy adjustment, which is why we use levels. So the next is exposure, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's the same exact thing as brightness and contrast, but it's the overall, so you can actually make the whole image go totally dark, and I find that less useful. So feel free to open it up, but we are not going to be using it in photography. The fourth adjustment on the top row is Vibrance, and if something is vibrant, it means it's colorful, full of life. So if we adjust this Vibrance all the way to 100, you can see that the colors have gotten darker. Over here on this green, there's now areas of red, and this red has actually gotten a little darker. Whereas if we turn the vibrance down, now the image still has color, but it's very faded. This could be an example of a cool photo because now all the warm colors are out of it, and it feels almost like you're cold. Brr. So this is the saturation tool, and it does the same thing really as Vibrance, but to a different degree. This saturates the color. So now if there was any red in the photo, there is a ton of red now. And if we bring it all the way down, you can make a black and white image. What? Cool. You can also just make it really dull as we just did. So definitely try that tool out. Now we have the hue and saturation layer, which is on the second row of the adjustments. And this allows you to change all the colors by just dragging these little pointers around. So we will totally talk about this, but I would love for you guys to just experiment with this one because I think it's the easiest way for you to figure out how that works. But do you want your whole color to be blue? Or your whole photo to be blue? Use this tool. So then our next tool that's next to it is the color balance tool, and this will help you change specific colors. So as I've mentioned, there's a lot of red in our photo. So if I want there to be more red, I can drag the red clicker thingy up, and now the photo is a lot more red. I can also make it a lot more blue and get rid of that red by going in the opposite direction. There are a lot of greens in the photo, but maybe I want some more greens and also some red. Now those greens are really popping, but that warmness is still within the photo. Definitely play around with color balance. We will be using it a lot to fix skin tone. So next to color balance is the lovely black and white tool. And if you're into black and white photos, this is the tool for you. This tool will immediately change your photo black and white, but then you can use your little clickers to slide the photo to make different adjustments. So anything that was red in the original photo, if I slide it to the right, it will become lighter. And as you can see, the t-shirt and the sun are getting really bright now. Similarly, if I go the opposite, now you can almost not see the subject because there was so much red in this photo. Black and white photos are awesome, and I totally encourage you to try and make a few. The photo filter is really easy. Let's say that you want a warm or a cool photo. You can go into one of these first 6, choose one, and it will automatically put a whole filter over it, just like Instagram. You can adjust the density or how intense that filter is with this density controller. So this is kind of interesting. I wonder what would happen if you guys used filters. So we are now going to ignore the channel mixer, and we're also going to ignore color lookup. Again, your Photoshop might have a little bit different adjustments because mine is a little older. So if we skip down to the third line of adjustments, there's Invert, and this is really exciting for some people. It just inverts your photo. So if you're into spooky things, this might be the layer adjustment for you. Next to that is Posterized, and all of the ones on the bottom are a little bit more intense kind of filters. As you can see with Posterized, it makes your photo look like a poster. So here we are with my levels clicker within the Posterize tool set at the highest, and as I posterize the image and bring this clicker to the left, it makes the image more drawing-like. It kind of looks like I made it on Paint from Microsoft Word. So that is a cool tool that I encourage you to at least try. Maybe you don't like it, but try it out. Threshold basically does the same. And again, we will see a histogram. And if you can see where my mouse is moving, this is the histogram. And as you can see, the image is in black and white. But if we move this histogram around, different areas will be seen. So maybe you took a photo, but you really like how this looks as almost a drawing. Go ahead and try that out. Selective Color allows you to adjust select colors, kind of similar to color balance, but it's a little bit more precise. I would just try it out. It's really the same thing as color balance though, except for example, as you can see, it says preset, custom, and then it says color red. I'm only changing the reds, but I'm changing the magenta within the red, or the yellow within the red. So we could talk about that one-on-one or in person because that's a little hard to explain over the computer. And we are going to ignore the gradient map, which is our last adjustment. So you've now seen a lot of different kinds of adjustments, and what I encourage you to do with your street photography is try out multiple adjustments on one photo, try out one adjustment per photo, but really try and use all of the adjustments to edit at least 12 photos. I look forward to seeing the work that you guys create, and definitely get experimental with this. Alright guys, thank you very much for listening to this tutorial. Hopefully it was helpful. Please give me feedback if it was or if it wasn't helpful. Some people like videos to follow along with, some people would rather do it with me one-on-one. So, whatever works for you guys.